Okay, hi, my name is Louise Larson. I run August Consulting, a consulting practice guiding families and their students on the road to college. This is my May webinar, and I'm going to kick it off with news and notes. Um, I loved this quote. Somebody said, if you licked a stamp to apply to college, and I was like, I licked a stamp to apply to college. If you licked a stamp when you applied to college, you need to it's going to be completely different. And I that made me laugh because I was like, yeah, I looked stamped to go to college. Um, so let's see. Couple of different things. I usually start with news and notes, and there's a lot of news and notes this month, and I'm going to wrap it all up with some talk about the FAFSA and testing and test optional and what that all looks like. And there's a lot going on, and it sort of upsets me that I'm still talking about testing because I think there's better things to talk about. But that's where we are. So interesting, 50% of high school graduates do not go to college. I was surprised by that. I thought that number would be less. So as you think about your child and potentially going to college, just remember that 50% of high school graduates do not pursue a four-year education. You must watch John Oliver's March presentation on student loan debt. It's funny, it's scary. It's last week tonight, I believe it was March 21st, 43.2 million Americans have student loans. 13% of the population have student loans. $1.73 trillion in student loans. And that is greater than the gross domestic product of Australia. So he goes on and on about what's involved with this and how hard it is when you are in that system to actually have accountability to the group servicing your loan. So it's really, before you take out student loans, I would watch what do you call it, last week tonight on March 21st. I hear a lot about passion projects. My student needs a passion project. Passion projects organically come to students. So do you have to have a passion project? No, I don't think you have to have one. Some students they aren't quite there. I think that some students with some reflection can think, you know what, I really am engaged in this. I really do like this, something that I've been doing, and I think I can take it to a new level. So I think passion projects should be considered and thought about and maybe explored, but you don't have to have a passion project. And that's something that you can't just magically fabricate. So I hear a lot about passion projects. Maybe maybe that's something your student might consider, but it doesn't have to be. And some kids just aren't there yet at 16. Common App prompts are going to remain the same for this coming year, so that's nice. Kudos, shout out to University of Georgia. In all this admissions chaos, University of Georgia has increased their class size by 200 students for incoming first-year students. So that in all this, they're creating more space for students. So good for them. Important to know, University of Wisconsin-Madison now has the Wisconsin-Madison guarantee that it auto-admits students that are in the top 5% of their class. So if you're in Wisconsin and you have a student that's in the top 5% of the class, that's great for you. If you are applying to Wisconsin out of state, there might be less seats. I would anticipate maybe Wisconsin becoming possibly more selective. I have a student that I thought this was very interesting. The student is a junior. They attend a private school that caps their applications at 10. And I thought, that's a really good goal. Instead of saying, let's go to 12, let's go to 15, finding the 10 best schools that suit you in a range of likely admits, targets, reaches. I thought that was a very interesting approach. Not easy, but a way to think about it. I am seeing lots of colleges in this cycle offer spring admit. So what that would mean for a senior is that they were admitted to attend next January. So they're not going to start in September. They're going to start potentially in January. Or The other thing I'm seeing is guaranteed transfer. So you go somewhere else for a year, and then you are guaranteed if it's a certain GPA or a certain amount of, there's usually some requirements for this, but guaranteed transfer or spring admit. So what does that mean? Spring admits are a way for colleges to bring in a next group. So in every fall, there's going to be a couple things going on. There's going to be students that maybe don't stay. Maybe they start the semester and they don't stay, or they finish the semester and they don't come back. And there's also a group of students that more students might go abroad in the spring. So spots open up in the second semester. So the schools have a whole kind of queue lined up of students to come in and take those spots. Guaranteed transfer is another way for colleges to lock up spots. So when students don't come back for their sophomore year, potentially, that these schools have students in the wings. I think guaranteed transfer, I don't love it for a variety of reasons. I think it stinks for the college. A student with guaranteed transfer has to go somewhere. So then they matriculate at a college that thinks they are coming there potentially, hopefully, for 4 years, but really they're going there to transfer. So I don't think that guaranteed transfer helps the whole college going cycle. I don't love it. I think a spring admit can be a nice way to maybe have a semester off and get in somewhere that you really wanted to go to. I'm not opposed to spring admits. I loved, I've quoted this guy before. Ned Johnson is some sort of mental health professional, and he has a blog called The Self-Driven Child. And he had done some stuff around testing. I think I quoted him in another webinar, and he had Jeff Salingo on his podcast, The Self-Driven Child. And what I loved about Ned Johnson, this is a guy with a lot of education, fair amount of position, the skills to maybe seek out highly selective colleges for his own children. And he has a child, he was talking about, his child attends Champlain College in Burlington, Vermont. And this is not an ultra-selective college. And I loved that he was talking about Champlain. When I get kids that really like Vermont, or they want to go to Burlington, but maybe they're not quite going to get into University of Vermont, or maybe the University of Vermont's just too big a place for them. Champlain is a place where students who have gotten B's and maybe didn't hit high school, kind of got a slow start, you can get into Champlain. So I love that this person with a national presence has a kid at Champlain and was talking about it. This kind of left me shaking my head. The ACT has been invested. A private equity firm is partnering to invest in the ACT, which is a nonprofit. I don't even know what to say about this. I mean, the ACT is probably losing market share. In the test optional world, the College Board, there is a duopoly. There's the College Board and there's the ACT. The College Board has the PSAT, which most schools are shutting down a day of class for their 10th graders, maybe their 9th graders and their 11th graders. The College Board has the PSAT. The College Board also has a robust advanced placement program now. If you have a child taking advanced placement courses in a public school, you are probably paying about $100 a test at least. So as test optional has come on and maybe students aren't taking the standardized testing as much, the UCs are test blind, maybe their market share has just dropped. College Board has some resources, but the ACT, who was talking a digital game before the College Board and is still not digital, now they have private equity. I don't even know how can something that is not for profit really, I don't know. I'm just, my head's spinning. 2025, the class of 2025 is the beginning of the demographic cliff, where there's going to be a dramatic drop in students going to high school, students graduating from high school, and ultimately students going to college. So I want to talk a little bit about college closures, because today I was going to post this for May 1st. It's the 29th of April, and I kind of got this organized over the weekend, my notes, and just today, 2 colleges announced their closing. St. Catherine's in California is closing, and Wells College in Aurora, New York, up by the Finger Lakes, is closing. So the demographic cliff, a lot of these smaller colleges got a lifeline in COVID. They got a lot of COVID money from the government, and so some of the closures were staved off. But Goddard College in Vermont closed, and that's why we're closing April 10th. And usually schools step up to say, we'll help your students transfer into our program. Prescott College in Arizona stepped up to take the Goddard students. And I was like, what kid in Vermont? I mean, maybe a kid in Vermont wants to go to Arizona after the Vermont winters. I don't know, but I was like, usually it's like a school nearby. Like Lemoyne stepped up for the Wells students. Hobart stepped up for the Wells students. These are schools in the same region. But this school in Prescott in Arizona said, well, welcome the Goddard students from Vermont. I don't know, maybe after you're in Vermont, you want to go to Arizona. I don't know. 40% of colleges in this country enroll less than 1,000 students. If you have a student and they're looking at a school with less than 1,000 students, you really want to do a deep dive on their finances and make sure that they are going to stay open. Colleges spend, I thought this was an interesting number, $3,000 per student to bring in a class. So if they bring in a class of 1,000 kids, 1,000 times 3,000, that's what it takes to bring in a class. Vanderbilt has decided to open another campus in West Palm Beach, focused on computer science and business. They're going to bring in 1,000 students. I don't know if this is 1,000 students total or 1,000 first year. I'm guessing it's more total students. Several colleges have done this. St. John's College has a campus in Annapolis and in New Mexico, and Northeastern has a campus in Oakland and Miami, and they've got a program in London. So this is something seeing more of, colleges having satellite campuses. So wait lists. Wait lists are moving. Some are moving. It's April 29th. So I'm going to talk about the deposit deadline in a bit, not quite yet. But typically the May 1st date was the national deposit date. So everybody had to decide by May 1st. So to see wait lists move before May 1st is interesting. And so we've seen several wait lists moving. We have seen University of Kentucky, sorry, University of Tennessee at Knoxville, University of Virginia, Tufts, University of Miami, Rice, Wake Forest, University of Chicago, and just today, there seems to be a little movement at Duke. I don't know what this means. I don't, colleges are a little bit like restaurants. Like just because one restaurant has waits doesn't mean the one, down the street also has a wait when you go to dinner. So how they choose to bring in their class, everybody's doing their own thing. Maybe some schools are oversubscribed. I would think that when we see this many schools and fairly selective schools moving before May 1st, we might see some significant movement after May 1st. But I'm going to talk more about the May 1st date in a bit. All right, so let's see. I'm going to talk about the FAFSA. There's a lot to talk about with the FAFSA. The FAFSA is just a giant ball of knots. There are so many issues around students can't make corrections, students with like one parent who is has a social security number and another one who doesn't can't get signed in. There are problems everywhere with the FAFSA. And so you don't need me to tell you that if you're doing this. So the FAFSA filing is down 40%. FAFSA filing is down 40%. And what I wanted to talk about, the deadline. So typically the deadline is May 1st, but because of the FAFSA delay, a lot of schools moved their deposit date back. Some of them May 15th, June 1st. I heard some school said May 6th. It seems like an odd date, but okay. So May 1st is really not the deposit date necessarily. But I have a family that I'm working with, and This just left me shaking my head, and this is how maddening this is right now. The the parent called a school that has not given them their information yet, and the school has moved their deposit deadline back and said, don't worry, we've moved our deposit deadline back. So even though you don't have our information, you don't have to deposit yet. And the parent said to the school, okay, but my students' other schools have a May 1st deadline. So if you don't tell me what my financial aid is before their deadline, what am I to do? And the parent said, you have had all my, and this is a CSS profile school, you have had all my information since November. So, the school's solution was, why don't you call the schools with the May 1st deadline and ask for an extension? And I said, oh my goodness, this is just a very hard, if you are negotiating all this with a senior right now or with a junior, it's a lot. I mean, I thought that was kind of crazy. Like, you've had this stuff for 6 months and you can't manually tabulate. Like, I mean, I can run a rough numbers and tell, what your expected contribution is. So I really felt for that kid, that parent, how frustrating this is. But this is a parent that has internet, speaks English, has a computer, a working credit card. They're going to figure it out. Don't worry about them. What really troubles me is the access schools. Now, what is an access school? An access school is a school that provides access to students who are not necessarily from college-going cultures. Maybe their parents didn't go to college, or they aren't at a school that's sending a lot of kids to college. Access schools tend to be a little smaller. They tend to be more regional. They tend to be public. And what troubles me about the whole FAFSA thing and all these college closures is that these access schools might not get their class next year. And these access schools tend to be smaller. And if they don't fill their class, they might close. So if there's a whole group of students and they are kind of on the edge, they might go to college, they might not. But if they can't get their FAFSA organized, they might, for this year, by next year, they might go, I don't know. And I will tell you a story. 25 years ago, I worked at a little school in New Jersey. It was called Henry Hudson, and it was a 7 through 12 school. It was very small, very unusual to have a secondary school go 7 through 12. And maybe it had 300 kids at the time. And I taught Spanish 5 there, and there was maybe a dozen kids in the class, and a range of like kids who were going to college to kids who were like, maybe I'll go to college. I don't know. And so and it was funny because this is 25 years ago and long before I was doing what I'm doing, but I was so sort of drawn to the process. And so these seniors, they were in Spanish 5, and they were kind of talking about college stuff. And occasionally they'd say, can I run out of guidance? And I'd say, sure. And I was around to kind of hear their conversations and maybe occasionally offer something. And there was 1 or 2 kids that I was really like, they might not go to college. And I said to them, if you all get into college, how about we make a goal that you all get an acceptance to college? And what do you want? Well, you guys figure out, if you all get into college, what are we going to do to celebrate? And they all kind of looked at me and said, if we all get into college, we want to come to your house for a cookout. And I was like, done. And it's so funny because I don't even think you could do this now. You couldn't just have kids over without everybody, I don't know, having a lawyer involved. So I said, done. So I had this one kid, and I kept kind of saying, hey, just poking him with this stuff. And he got into St. Peter's College. And I was talking about him with a friend whose family was from northern New Jersey. And the mother said, there's a little scholarship at St. Peter's in my dad's name. Maybe I can direct it to this kid. And I share all this to say that when these students that are kind of 50-50, maybe I'll go to college, maybe I won't, are in their high schools bumping up, not, coming into contact with teachers that are saying, hey, did you do this? Or, hey, your guidance counselor might have an idea, or kind of poking them along a little bit. When they are not in that environment, it becomes very difficult to get to college. So I thought about that story. I thought, gosh, you couldn't even do that now. And they all came over and like we had this little cookout and they were adorable. And that was that. So access colleges are not going to get their classes and they're going to close. Now, I want to share one more little thing. I have a student, my son is graduating this May from an access college. He was kind of a COVID, he transferred, he ended up in New Jersey at a college called Ramapo, which is a New Jersey public school. And let me tell you, when I paid that in-state tuition on this side of the proper side of the border, I was very happy. And Ramapo is an access college. And when we took him there for just transfer onboarding, my husband had the good sense to wear a collared shirt in the school's colors. And I wore like a flower dress. And I showed up at transfer intake day. Every type of person under the sun, entourages of families, every type of car, like rusted cars, brand new cars. There was a car with the windshield that was so shattered, I didn't know how they were seeing out the windshield. I mean, languages, you name it. It was absolutely as the thing that was not diverse was everybody had a Ramapo shirt on, except me. Everybody had a Ramapo shirt. Ramapo mom, Ramapo, everybody was wearing Ramapo swag. There was one family, a giant entourage, and they all had custom shirts and they all said, look out, Ramapo, here she comes. And I was like, my jaw was on the ground because I'm in a college going culture. Like this transfer intake day had the festivity of a graduation. People were so excited. It really moved me. And when I got to my son's suite, the other mother there that I did not know hugged me and said, congratulations. So I was really moved to be in this culture that this is a big deal that our kids going to college. And access schools closing really upsets me because this is where if you have a Pell Grant and a student loan and you're an RA, you can go to Ramapo and probably kind of piece it together pretty well. So it really upsets me when access schools are closing. So I just want to touch on one more little thing before I go into testing, and that is parent Facebook pages. Should you be on your parents' Facebook page? And my answer is yes. The Facebook page is like a bell curve. There are two ends. One end is absolutely useful. Occasionally you get a little nugget of information that you're like, ooh, thank you. That is very, very helpful. 90% of it is absolutely nothing. 5% of it on the far end, you're like, oh, this is bad. Like this parent is too involved. Like, you'd be like, he lost his meal card. I'm so upset. I don't know what to do. Like your meal cards have been being lost for eternity. Like it's no big deal. I mean, I shouldn't say it's no big deal, but like your kids are gonna have to figure it out. But occasionally on your parent Facebook page, there is a little bit of information that is very useful. And I went onto the Ramapo Facebook page to see about just some graduation details. Now the graduation is at the Prudential Center in Newark. And somebody wrote, you would be very smart to reserve parking at the Prudential Center. And I was like, oh, that's a really good idea. And they even had the link. So, if you have a college student going to college and you should be on the Facebook page, it could be useful. Occasionally, there really is some nuggets there of wisdom, of good information. So here we go. I've talked about I've talked about the FAFSA. We know that's not great. But what I'm talking about now is testing, because a lot has changed since my last webinar, which some schools had started to go require testing in March. So I shared that in April. And now it's been a little bit more of a tsunami. And I wanted to talk about this. So the March scores came out. People were not that happy. It didn't seem like it had a great curve or algorithm. So hopefully maybe May is better. I don't know. I didn't hear like super scores that people are like, wow, this is great. I really love this. So there's that. So a lot of schools have come back to testing. Now this is just absolutely maddening to me. Cornell has announced that they're going to be requiring test scores. On April 23rd, they announced this. This is the last day for late SAT registration for May. So thanks for the heads up. Now, they're encouraged for 2025. So encouraged means probably you need the test scores. Required for the class of 2026. Test blind programs will continue to be test blind. Agriculture and life sciences, architecture, art and planning, and the S.C. Johnson Business School will remain test blind. I don't know. I mean, why would they require them for everybody else, but not the business school? I don't know. I can see why agriculture and life sciences, maybe architecture, they want to bring in a different type of skid, different strengths. I don't know. But they're announcing it on April 23rd and telling the class of 25 that they, encourage scores. Thank you. So who else? Hold on, there's more. Earlier in the month, Harvard backtracked, but Harvard said they were going to be test optional through 26, and they backed it up and said they're going to require scores for 2025. Caltech, it was interesting when MIT came back, and I like MIT because MIT is very transparent with their stuff around admissions. And when they went and said they were going to require test scores, they really explained it. And okay, great, thank you. And at the same time, Caltech kind of came out and publicly said, we don't need test scores at Caltech. And Caltech came back in early April and said they're requiring scores. And there was somebody else that just came back requiring scores. I forget, Texas Austin is requiring scores, but I might have announced that in my last one, but that's public school. So will we continue to see more? Will this turn into an avalanche? I don't know. But my advice is to test. I know that that's hard, and I know that not everybody loves it, but that is my advice, is that you will probably have more options with test scores than potentially without. So here is a couple things about this. The digital SAT put out 4 tests before the March test. And 1, 2, and 3 were just too easy. They weren't representative of how you would actually score. Test 4 was more accurate. They have released 5 and 6, which should be more accurate for gauging how you would do. And tests 7 and 8, I believe, have been released or are coming soon. You can count on potentially seeing gains through 3 test sittings. So if you took it once or twice and you think you might want to take it a 3rd time, might be a good idea. There have been 3 SAT revamps in the past, say, 30 years. They went from 1600 to 2400. Now they went back to 1600. They became digital. The digital SAT came into play because there were massive security breaches overseas, and they just couldn't keep it secure. And they knew they were losing market share, so they needed to do something. This test is shorter. And the one thing you need to know about the College Board and the SAT is when they say that they have researched and they have done this and they have done that, that is their word. There is nobody oversees the College Board. There is no accountability. There is nowhere to go to say, hey, the College Board said this, is this true? So, the ACT and the College Board, they're a duopoly. They are businesses. We know ACT's been invested in by private equity. So just information to know. The executives are paid millions of dollars at these companies. I want to talk a little bit about test optional admissions. Obviously, it's a whole group of schools that were test optional before the pandemic, and they were holistically, I think it was either Bates or Bowdoin was the very first one in 1969, I forget. A lot of schools were test optional prior to the pandemic. So if that is the case, you can be pretty sure that when they say they're going to do a holistic evaluation, they will. Since 2020, that spring, when they realized juniors wouldn't be able to test, what test optional meant in the fall of 2020 versus what it means now for some schools has changed. It's ever evolving and it's fast moving and it's always changing and it's a little bit of musical chairs. And what it means at one school does not mean what it means in another school. A lot of schools really put out very transparent data that first year or two. Here's how many test applicants we had. Here's how many were test optional. Here's how many sent test scores. Here was the average test score. Here's how many we admitted from each pool. I don't see that data out so much anymore, which makes me think that some of these schools might be leaning more into test scores and using test optional to cherry pick when they want a certain kid from a certain region that fills an institutional priority. So for the average kid, I think a lot of these schools, school by school, I don't want to make gross generalizations, but I think that some of these schools want test scores, but they use it to suit their institutional goals when there aren't test scores. So, and I think it's going to continue to change. It's going to continue to change. So one of the big questions, there's two big questions. If you have a junior or anybody, if you're not junior down, junior or younger, is one of the questions is, do you send the scores? That's a big one. Do you send the scores? And one of the answers to those is, are you in the 50%? And how are your scores coming out of your high school? If your high school has an average SAT of 1100 and you have a 1350, that's pretty good. But there's schools where 1350 is below average. So certainly those are two metrics to use. Are you in the school's 50%, and are you high on your school's average? But the other big question, and this is a big question, do you keep testing? Is it worth it? I've seen kids, they've got a 4.8 and they're consistently testing at 1100. And you start to say, at what point is 1100 going to enhance a kid who's an IB diploma candidate with a 4.8 and a lot of really neat extracurriculars? So that is a big question for families and it's hard to know spring of junior year, maybe your list isn't quite done, so you're not quite sure. It's almost like you don't know if you need those scores till maybe it's too late. But I never think it's too late, because I do think you can test in the fall of senior year. There's multiple test dates for both tests. So you really have to ask, is your whole family's time and resources around test prep, testing, where are those best spent? Is it best spent more creating some downtime for your kid, or could these scores come online? So it's a big question. Not only do you send the test scores, but when do you say enough? I think that the student has potentially maxed out and that their resources could be better spent elsewhere. So that is, I think that's pretty much everything I had. I had to cut it at some point. I mean, more news was coming across my little sources, and finally I said, okay, I'm just gonna have to present what I have. And I hope this all made sense. I think that I think we could potentially, based on the waitlist movement we've seen, maybe after May 1st, we're going to see more, especially as schools push some of their dates back. Here's what I will leave you with. I don't think students should have a dream college. I think that a dream college doesn't exist. There are many, many colleges that could suit most students. So I think the goal is to really make college a dream and find a list of schools that could all fulfill that dream. So I will post this, and as always, if there's any questions, feel free to reach out, and thanks for watching.